Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this reasonably sized guy right here. This is the TRM Shadow, the Three Rivers Manufacturing Shadow. First off, though, in the name of full disclosure, I want to thank TRM for giving me the opportunity to purchase one of these guys. I did pay full price for it, but, these are going to be hard to get for a little while, and, well, being a reviewer does have its perks, so I was able to pick one of these guys up with their assistance. Nonetheless, we have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and as always, I told them I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. Might be a gem, might be junk. They still did send it along. There you go. Next thing, let's do some size comparison real quick. First off, against the standards for the channel, the Spyderco Delica. So what we see here is this is not a small knife particularly. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2. And if I can open that up, there we go, the PM2. And so what we see here is that they're relatively similar in terms of size, and in terms of overall blade length, just maybe a hair longer on the Shadow. And then here it is against, in terms of sharpened, that is. Blade length, here it is against the Rat 1. Again, it's a reasonably sized knife. And then actually a couple of other relevant size comparisons here. First one against the Spyderco Shaman, which for whatever reason really feels like these two knives feel like they are in direct competition to me. In terms of sharpened length, they are almost identical. In terms of ergonomics, they have a lot of similarities to them. They're very different in a number of ways, but there you go. Then finally, against a couple of other TRM knives, here it is against the TRM Neutron, first generation. And here it is against the Atom. And so what we see here is in terms of sharpened blade length, we're a little bit longer than the Neutron, but a little tiny bit shorter than the Atom. So we're sort of in an intermediate size range right here. Next thing, and one knife I don't have around for comparison is the TRM Nerd. And in a lot of ways, this knife is a gigantic TRM Nerd. I mean, frankly, if it's a gigantic Nerd, they could have just called it the Nick Shabazz. But anyways, I digress. This is a bigger version of the TRM Nerd knife in a lot of ways, but it has a lot of things that are very different and make it kind of its own thing. Next thing, one thing you're going to notice as we're looking at this is actually the lock bar is a little bit different, as well as the screws are a little bit different than the one I disassembled. This is because I disassembled the very, very first, like one of the very first items to ever be produced. And then later on, they sent me this guy with a couple of small improvements. Changes to lock bar to remove the stick, as well as changes to the screws on here to make the sliding bar lock just a little bit more comfortable. Next thing, I want to preempt a class of lame comments that always seem to occur on TRM reviews. So here we go. I'm going to get them out of the way so you don't have to post them. Oh my God, why are you reviewing this? You can't even purchase them. Oh my God, why does TRM hate us? Do they not like making knives? Oh my God, of course you got one. Oh, why can't they just make more? Look, I get it. I totally understand it. And your point is very valid. I wish that these were more available too. I wish that all their products were. But the fact is they're a small business making great products. And as such, they're having trouble keeping them in stock. I do believe that they are trying to increase capacity while still maintaining quality. But please, if that's the only thing you have to comment on, I covered it for you. You're all set. Come up with something interesting to say about the thing for a change. Anyways, I digress. So anyways, we're going to go on ahead and talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. And hopefully the commenters are going to focus on other things about this particular knife right here. So first off, on the good side, this is made in the USA. It's made in Massachusetts, as a matter of fact. And so that's nice, right? Look, quality is about effort rather than geography, but of course it's always nice for me to see something being made in my home country, as I'm sure it is for you and yours. So, anyways, that's a beautiful thing for many. Next thing, size comparison. Wow, I'm on autopilot today. Next thing, the studs on these guys are quite nice. They are very catchy. What I mean by that is that they like Mambo number 5 catchy. They're very easy to grab your thumb, grab with your thumb there and pop open. It makes it very easy to deploy this guy. One other thing that's worth noting is that if you put this at the right angle as you're pulling it out of your pocket, you can actually catch the pocket on there and effectively use this as like an Emerson wave style thing. This is kind of a weird little thing, and I don't know that I recommend it strictly speaking, but it is a possibility, and that's kind of nice, right? But these are very easy to use, and very easy to use with gloves on, that kind of thing, without being too painful or otherwise. So there's that. Next thing, this is a fully ambidextrous knife. What we see here is that the clip can be moved from one side to the other very easily, and then the rest of the knife with ambidextrous thumb studs, with ambidextrous cutouts, with ambidextrous sliding bar lock, is completely the same for lefties and righties. That's a beautiful thing for about 10% of the population, and that's a nice thing. Next thing, this guy has a disassemblable lock bar in the middle here, or sliding bar, I suppose, lock. Whatever it is, that makes the disassembly markedly easier than the majority, a full disassembly that is, than the majority of sliding bar style lock things like the Benchmade Axis lock, Hogue Able lock, etc. This is just easier, and frankly, I would say it is better. That is a very, very nice thing, and I appreciated it very, very much. Next thing, they come with an extra set of springs, which I appreciate very much. Next thing, they've given us a little filler tab right here. This goes, of course, where the left-sided clip would go on the knife when carried for right, and you can flip it over. It definitely beats just having a hole in the handle there, right? And, in some ways, it's probably more attractive than having, a set of screw holes or something like that. But at the same time, it's nice, and it gives people something to, they're probably going to start selling more variations of these in different materials and whatnot. Yeah, get a Mokutai flip or filler tab, whatever. I mean, Hinder has been doing that for a while. Why not, right? So there's that. Next thing, this has very clean machining and details here. This is, in a lot of ways, it feels a little bit more tooly than a lot of TRM stuff, but at the same time, if you look in and you focus in on the details, they are definitely there. I mean, one of those details is the pivot here. This pivot is not nothing, right? This has a very interesting design with a faceting on many dimensions here. That's kind of a cool little detail here. And similarly, if we look right in this area, this isn't, and by the way, this looks very close, but because the stock is so thin, you don't cut yourself. It's almost like thin stock is a good idea on pocket knives. Anyways, but you can see here, they've done a lot of good milling here to keep this area comfortable as you're using this and as you're gripping on it, but without, that's just nice. We can see the handle milling looks quite good here. We've got an integral backspacer that's been basically one half of the G10 contains the backspacer on this side of things. It's really well done, generally speaking. I like this, and even just like the logo here is milled in rather than etched, which I appreciate and I think looks pretty good. This is just a knife where it's very, very clear that TRM really wanted to flex a little bit on the machining, even though this does feel like a little bit more of a straightforward, even the pivot on it looks nice, even though it is more of a straightforward tool, so I appreciate that very much. Next thing, the action on this guy is very, very nice. It has that sort of drop shut, fall shut, fling shut, whatever shutting you'd like, action that you get unless you let go of the bar beforehand, that you want from a sliding bar style lock. That's a great thing. The action on this is exactly what one would hope for out of a sliding bar style lock, and it does all that with zero play, with no difficulty whatsoever. Easy to get an adjustment though, so that's a beautiful thing. Next thing, this guy has a really nice blade. It is 20 CV, which is, if not the best knife steel out there, one of the contenders for it. It is ground nice and thin, which is a beautiful thing, and it is just thin behind the edge too. I mean, thin stock, thin behind the edge makes this guy cut like crazy. The tip on this guy is very, very thin. If we compare this, for instance, to the Spyderco Shaman, which is itself no slouch in the slicing department, but we see here, this is an entirely different world. And if you're trying to cut into something very firm, like for instance clamshell packaging, we'll cower before this, even though, and the Shaman's not bad, by the way. I should be comparing it to something way thicker, but nonetheless, this is a very, very nice slicey sort of knife, and I appreciate that very, very much. The blade on this guy is absolutely great, and so to me, all of that is the good, is it's got a great blade, great action, clean machining and details, the filler tab thing, an extra set of springs, disassemblable bar. It is fully MB with nice studs, and it is made in the US of the A. On the great side, to me, I just like kind of what this thing is, which is sort of a very utility focused. In a lot of ways, this feels like a it's after the same class of use as like the Spyderco Shaman or the Benchmade Griptilian or something like that. This feels like it's aiming to be a relatively working knife in some ways. We'll talk about the duality here later on. But at the same time, it is still very, very much a slicing first knife. That means it's not going to be the right choice if you're going to be batoning through a car hood or something with it. But it feels a lot more worky. It feels a lot more durable, etc. than, for instance, the Atom or the Neutron. One of the common complaints that people have is, well, Nick, if I do weird abusive cutting tasks, I can cause the frames to warp or something like that. Well, sure, I guess, if you're gonna beat up in your knife. But this is a knife that feels like that could take it a little bit more readily, right? It's a very durable, worky feeling knife with good ergonomics and everything like that, which I think I mentioned already, but in case I didn't, the ergonomics are really good. Yet it still has this beautiful slicey grind. If you are looking for something to slam through car doors. This probably isn't what you want. Frankly, nothing that TRM makes is. And I'm grateful for it, but you get something that is very, very slicey, but also feels like it belongs very well in a more working situation, rather than, just an EDC sort of thing. So to me, at least, that's what's great, is they've created a knife that feels very, very durable, but remains a very, very slicey and great cutting tool. On the bad side, to start with, as this is the Shadow, vampires will be unable to purchase this. Next thing, there are not the ability to do the scale swap thing. On the TRM Atom and Neutron, you can just remove these two screws and then lift off this scale and replace it with something else, and that's a really nice feature. Unfortunately, because of the construction of this guy, that kind of thing is not possible, and the TRM folks have said that they will not be selling replacement scales for it, at least at this juncture. That is kind of a shame, in my estimation. I get it, right? The scales are playing a much more integral role, quite literally. The backspace is a part of the scales, but at the same time, I think there are going to be a lot of people who are going to feel like, oh, well, that's kind of a sad thing to leave on the table. I get it, but it is definitely a missing joy. Next thing, the filler tab. I mentioned that that's good, and frankly, I think it's better that they include it than that they don't. They just have a hole in the thing there. But at the same time, it definitely draws attention to this area. And I can see, maybe if this were a DLC black or something, and nothing stopping me from doing that, probably not DLC, but nonetheless, it just feels like it very much sticks out a little bit. If I were to do something more stylized here, maybe I could find more joy in it, right? But at the moment, I don't know. I kind of would have liked the matching G10 or something like that, just to de-emphasize this random chunk there. Not the end of the world, and like I said, it gives you some choice, and so I can't get too bent out of shape, but that is definitely a thing. Next thing, as I mentioned already, the thumb stud here, being a little on the grabby side, is very easy to get at and actually can grab on your pocket material to productive ends. It'll allow you to pull the knife out using your pocket alone, but you also want to be careful about that, right? The way I figured that out is I accidentally waved the knife open. And you know what? It's fine, worked out, but still, do keep that in mind. There is a certain angle you're going to want to use if you don't want to have that happen. Well, actually, vice versa. It's harder to make that happen than not, but still, keep that in mind. Next thing, the price point on this guy is unfortunately a little bit odd. It is $280. And look, that's a chunk of change, right? And especially compared to the Spyderco Shaman, which is coming in at $210, which in a lot of ways feels very analogous in terms of certainly purpose. I don't necessarily see that. There is a lot of machining that's gone on here. Obviously, it's a pocket knife. Of course there is. But at some level, they've done a lot of things that are kind of extra miley. This amount of extra here, the filler tab, they've done a lot to make this look good, to make it feel very high quality, but at the moment it sort of feels a little bit like, ooh, that's up there very much. I think some other materials might make it feel a little bit more premium, but this feels like one of those cases in which this might absolutely be what it costs them to make it, but it doesn't quite feel like it adds up necessarily. I think there are going to be people, and myself included, who will happily pay that price, but at the same time, that definitely doesn't feel like it's pushing strong value, and relative to a lot of the comparable knives, this is definitely pricey up there. So, there's that. And then finally, the availability of these. Look, I don't know yet. Right now, it's to the point where only a relatively small number of these guys have been sold to members of the general public, right? They are out there, but they're a little hard to get. Everything TRM makes is hard to get these days. God, I hate the people who hype up companies like this. Anyways, I digress. But the availability is likely to be a problem for them, for the foreseeable future here. So I can recommend it, and it's great. And frankly, I do. But at the same time, getting one is a very different question, and I kind of wish that wasn't the case. I know they're scaling up material, scaling up their production and whatnot. And I want to see them do it right and not just pump out a bunch of stuff that turns out to be crappy. But at the same time, the availability remains a major problem for TRM, and it's something that I hope they're going to be able to continue to address. So to me, all of that is the bad, is that the availability isn't great. The price point feels maybe a little bit high. The stud positioning can grab pocket material if you're not careful, pro and a con. Not convinced by the filler tab, but I guess it's good to have choice. No scale swaps here, and vampires are not able to purchase one. On the ugly front, there's nothing particularly ugly here, so let's just go on ahead and, the availability. Honestly, the reason that's not there yet is I don't know what the demand is going to look like for these. If they fly off the shelves like the Atom and Neutron, that's going to be ugly, but at the moment, I don't know. know. So at the very least, it's there. It's a thing. Okay, final conclusions. This is, in a lot of ways, a really great knife. With made in the USA construction, very nice thumb studs here, fully ambi construction. It's got a disassemblable lock bar, which makes things actually a lot easier. The extra set of springs, a filler tab, if that's your style. Well, frankly, even if it's not. It's got great details, great action, a great blade, and a construction that feels very beefy, yet at the same time remains very slicey. You do lose that scale swapping that makes the neutron and the atom feel very unique, and the nerd for that matter. The filler tab is definitely kind of a pro and a con, depending on your viewpoint. The stud can be a wave, so you just got to be a little careful with that. The price point is definitely not pushing the value, and at the same time, TRM is a company that's been struggling to keep up with demand, so it's going to be a little hard to get one. Ultimately, though, my feeling on this knife was actually surprisingly good. I know many of you are going to be like, oh, of course, he's a TRM fanboy, he's not surprised, but honestly, on paper, I wasn't necessarily taken with it, right? Looking at it in pictures, it's like, okay, hey, it's another Axis style sort of knife. Okay, whatever, right? And then I get it in the hand and it was like, oh, well, that's better. Because the sliding bar side of it is done very, very well. This is TRM's first sliding bar lock, and they've really knocked it out of the park. With things like good centering, with really nice tolerances, with no play, etc. It's clear that they really tried, and they've done a lot of work to really come in at the top of that category, so to speak. Or at least certainly near the top. I don't want to, I'm not making a ranking over here. Right? And then they've got a lot of the little machining details in here, with the grooves, with the pivot, even these little grooves on the top here, which, by the way, actually help to provide a little bit of texture against your hand, which I appreciate very much. And then they've got the construction that feels a little bit different than what they've normally done, right? A lot of this stuff feels very small, slicey, and svelte, whereas this feels a little bit beefier. This feels a little bit more hardcore, although while remaining a very firmly slicing beast. I mean, it's firm too. I mean, the hardness is up there, right? But still, and then it's, got a blade that's tuned for cutting rather than beating, which is definitely something I appreciate very much. And honestly, all of this kind of thing is that cutting rather than beating, the slicey svelte blades, that's kind of TRM shtick at this point, right? It's the thing that they're doing best relative to a lot of companies in the knife world right now, and I really do appreciate it. A lot of folks make knives, and a lot of folks make knives that look like this, but none of them make knives that cut like this. I'm sorry, maybe not none of them. Certainly there are people who do good grinds, but it's the exception rather than the rule, and thin stock. But the thing is, there's also a really strange duality here. Because at some level, you look at this guy, and it looks like a harder-to-use sort of worky knife. And the aesthetic is kind of in the general area in that line, right? But then at the same time, the blade is very, very, very slicey, and the details are very fancy, and the price is certainly more of a luxury price. In a lot of ways, this knife feels a little bit like a duality, right? It's like a high-polished field watch or luxury cowboy boots. I mean, it's clearly born in the field. It's clearly coming out of the same place as, for instance, the Spyderco Shaman in terms of the market, but at the same time, it's a little bit more comfortable, it feels like, in a pair of slacks. Not that it won't put in good work, but it has to be a specific kind of thing, right? And so I feel like in a lot of ways, this knife was very naturally up against the Spyderco Shaman, which is, by the way, one of my very favorite knives. This is a really great design. But it feels like it's got a level of fancy that's dialed up a little bit, and, a level of slicey that's dialed up even further. And not that the Shaman is particularly bad in that regard, right? But with thinner stock, etc., the TRM just cuts in a very, very different class. And for what it's worth, this has actually largely replaced the Shaman in my pocket. Not that I get a chance to carry my own knives that often anyways, but on a day when I might have carried the Shaman, I find myself carrying this guy, or if I need something really beatery, maybe the Demco 8020 or something like that. But the slicey blade and a touch more fancy really suits my life a little bit better than this guy does. But that, of course, might be a factor of my life and my budget more than anything. Personally, what I'm kind of excited most about for this guy is where it goes from here, right? Because I think a full titanium version of this would be amazing. With this kind of detail, with this kind of fluting, with this kind of construction, that would be awesome. And so a full tie shadow, I have no confirmation, by the way, that this should be a thing, or that this is a thing, but it should be a thing. I would love nothing more than to see that. I think that would be the natural evolution of this, and would create something that would be really cool, right? That would be awesome, and it would turn this guy very easily into a very high-end pocket knife, especially with some of their milling, right? I'd also like to see additional scale choices, even if they have to sell it as whole knives, as well as maybe different hardware choices, too, as a way to play dress up a little bit with the knife. They've hinted at that for the flipper tab already, right? And then the other thing that maybe could be seen here is a more dressed down version. Something with plain G10 with a plain pivot, etc., that is able to get that price down a little bit more to compete with the Shaman a little bit better as a daily work knife, right? So I think this is the start of the Shadow, but I think there's a lot more potential here down the road. As for gem status, I'm kind of right on the fence. And the reason I say that is, well, at some level I love it. It's supplanted an existing gem. But I also acknowledge this is not a one-size-fits-all knife. The price is definitely up there, and honestly, that's the price. That's the thing that's keeping this from being like a yes, go buy one, it's a gem. 100% have fun, right? This is not cheap whatsoever. And that's the thing that's keeping this from, being there. $280 is a lot of money for a pocket knife. And so, I think it is really excellent. It could very easily serve somebody's needs well as it has mine. And it is most certainly a gem for me. And I think it could very easily be one for you too, but much like every other kind of Shadow, I think this is going to be pretty individual. And only you're going to know whether this belongs in the cast of your collection. Get it? Cast of Shadow? Okay. Anyways, hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.